a board game almost ended my marriage. So it was August of 2014. My wife Chelsea and I had been married for about 2 weeks at this point, and I wanted us to do something together. And so I asked my wife to play a board game with me. And the game in question was Lord of the Rings Risk, which if you're unfamiliar with that game, and I would guess most of you are, it's very similar. It's based on the game Risk, which you may or may not have played. If you're unfamiliar with that game, Risk is a military strategy game where you get the board out on the table. It's the map of our world, and everyone has like different colored armies that they put on all the different territories, on all these different countries on the map, and you like battle each other and try and take over the world, essentially. And the Lord of the Rings Risk works much the same way, except that instead of a map of our world, it's a map of Middle Earth. So all the names are very difficult to pronounce. And instead of cannons, you're fighting with like eagles and trolls. And so to get started, first I had to explain the rules to the game, because I don't think she'd even played normal Risk at that point. And so that probably took 20 to 30 minutes just to explain the rules of the game. Then we had to set up the board. And if you've ever played a Risk or game or something similar to that, you know that it's a pretty involved process. You have to draw all these cards, meticulously place all your units, all your armies onto the map. There's a lot of strategizing. Even as you put units onto the map, you're already thinking about how you can prepare yourself well and set yourself up to play the game. And so setting up the board probably took another 30 to 40 minutes. So at this point, we have invested a full hour or more into a game that we haven't even started yet. But finally, everything was set up, everything was in its place, we're prepared, we're ready to play. I go to grab some dice for my very first attack, and my wonderful wife, whom I love, who I'd been married to for less than a month at this point, looked at me from over the table across our map full of armies and said, "I don't actually want to play this game anymore." And I was crushed because I was really excited to play this game. And so all I could see was like all this time, all this anticipation had just been wasted. It was all preparation and no payoff in my eyes. And here's why this story came to mind this week. Sometimes I think that's how we feel about wilderness seasons. That a wilderness season, those seasons, those times in life that are difficult, that are hard, I think they often feel like setting up for a game of Risk. They're tedious, maybe even painful, and it can feel like wasted time. But as we're going to see in the life of Israel, God uses the wilderness to prepare us. And unlike our Risk game, however many years ago, there is a plan and a purpose behind the preparation. So my goal this morning is to talk about how God prepares us in the wilderness and what he prepares us for. So we are in the final week of our series, Finding Hope in Dark Places. It's a series all about the wilderness, a dry, barren, dangerous location in the Bible, the kind of location that is not at all conducive to human flourishing. And in addition to being a real location into which many of the biblical characters entered into, the wilderness also serves as a symbol for difficult seasons in our lives, seasons where we feel exhausted, depleted, or attacked. And as we've explored the idea of the wilderness, much of our time already has been spent in Deuteronomy chapter 8, which I'd like to spend the bulk of our time in again this morning. And so the text will be on the screen, but if you have the YouVersion Bible app on your phone, if you brought a paper Bible with you, I would encourage you to turn there so you can have the text in front of you. We'll pretty much be in Deuteronomy 8 all morning. We'll start in verse 1. In the passage we are about to read, Moses is giving the reason behind why, as God led Israel and rescued them out of slavery in Egypt, why he chose to lead them into the wilderness. So let's read Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 1 and 2. Be careful to obey all the commands I, that is Moses, am giving you today. Then you will live and multiply, and you will enter and occupy the land the Lord swore to give your ancestors. Remember how the Lord your God led you through the wilderness for these 40 years. So right out the gate, Moses is talking about two different places, two different locations. He's talking about the land the Lord swore to give your ancestors, often called the Promised Land, and the wilderness. And these two places could not be more different. And they're both deeply connected to two concepts I personally have been thinking about a lot throughout this series. And here are the two concepts. I've even put them up here. Scarcity and abundance. Scarcity and abundance. Now, I know these are kind of abstract concepts, so let me kind of ground them for us this morning. Scarcity is all about not having enough. Scarcity in our lives today is those seasons where money is tight, where we don't feel like we have enough to even pay our bills. Our relationships are strained. You find yourself fighting with your spouse more often than normal. We feel scarcity when our health takes a turn for the worse, or a loved one is struggling or passes away. Scarcity is when God feels distant, when you feel aimless or purposeless. That is what scarcity feels like. And scarcity is what you experience in the wilderness. Both the literal location, the rocky, desert, dry, barren place is a place of scarcity, but also the metaphorical season of life. Contrast that with abundance, which you've also probably experienced moments of. Abundance is when you have more than you need. Abundance is when all your bills are paid and there's still some money left over in the bank. When your relationship with your kids and your spouse just is easy and it's good. When you have a great job, when you're living a life of purpose, you've got a great community around you, whether it be at church, your family, your friends. That is what abundance feels like. I think we've all experienced both scarcity and abundance. And if you're like me, you definitely have a preference between the two. Like, I remember when Chelsea and I first got married, right about the time when we almost ended our marriage over a game of Risk. We'd moved out to Indiana like 5 days after we got married, and I was going to seminary, and I had a very, very part-time job at a church, getting paid practically nothing. I was working at Domino's at the time. She was working at Starbucks, and so we did not have a lot of money. In fact, money was pretty tight for that year or so that we lived there. And then we moved, about a year later, we moved to Fort Wayne, Indiana. And my wife got a new job, and she started working for a tree company, planning tree work along power lines. It's something that was part kind of her degree that she'd gotten in. And she made more money in that job than we had ever seen in our lives. It was a really good job, and I was still going to seminary, and I was still part-time at a church, and so for a long time, I called her my sugar mama because she was just making so much more money, and we were pretty much living off of everything that she was making. And so I know what scarcity feels like. I know what abundance feels like, and let me tell you, I prefer abundance. Right? And I would assume that you do too. We would all rather have more than we need than having not enough. And so it can be easy when we find ourselves in a wilderness season, when we find ourselves in a season of scarcity, whether it be physical, emotional, spiritual scarcity. It can be easy to become upset with God because we want abundance, but it feels like all He's giving us is scarcity. I would imagine that Israel felt that tension as they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Because after all, it was God's original plan for them to go into the Promised Land. He wanted to give them abundance. After all, as Moses continues on in verse 6, this is how he describes that land. He says, "So obey the commands of the Lord your God by walking in His ways and fearing Him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land of flowing streams and pools of water, with fountains and springs that gush out into the valleys and hills. It is a land of wheat and barley, of grapevines, fig trees, and pomegranates, of olive oil and honey. It is a land where food is plentiful and nothing is lacking. It is a land where iron is as common as stone and copper is abundant in the hills. When you have eaten your fill, be sure to praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. This land that Moses describes is, to an ancient person living in this region, particularly someone who's been wandering in the wilderness for as long as they have, this would have been the ideal land. This is a description of what an abundant life would look like to an ancient Israelite. However, I also recognize that we are living a few thousand years after this, and our world today is very different. Right? Because we're just not very impressed by wheat and olive oil and pomegranates. We can find all of those at Walmart, right? And so I've attempted to recreate a list of what Moses might have said if he were talking to our generation today and describing our land of abundance, our promised land. And I've taken some creative liberties with this, okay? So here's how Moses might describe the land to us today. It is a land where everyone gets a house with one bedroom more than they need, and a garage big enough to store all of their junk and their vehicles. It's a land where your TV takes up a whole wall and Amazon delivers same day. A land overflowing with the newest iPhones and trucks and SUVs, where everyone gets a boat or a camper and enough time off to actually use it. That sounds like a pretty good land, right? And so the land Moses is describing would have seemed almost like magical in its abundance for them. So here it begs the question, if what God wanted for the Israelites was this promised land, why go through the wilderness at all? Why let them experience scarcity if what God really wanted for them was abundance? Well, as Moses continues, we get a pretty clear picture as to why. Because immediately after describing how awesome this promised land of abundance would be, he gives a stark warning. Verse 11. But that is the time to be careful. Beware that in your plenty you do not forget the Lord your God and disobey his commands, regulations, and decrees that I am giving you today. For when you have become full and prosperous and have built fine homes to live in, when your flocks and herds have become large and your silver and gold have multiplied along with everything else, be careful. Do not become proud at the time and forget the Lord your God who rescued you from slavery in the land of Egypt. Do not forget that he led you through the great and terrifying wilderness with its poisonous snakes and scorpions where it was so hot and dry. He gave you water from under the rock. He fed you with manna in the wilderness, a food unknown to your ancestors. He did this to humble you and test you for your own good. He did all of this so that you would never say, I have achieved this wealth with my own strength and energy. Remember the Lord your God. He is the one who gives you power to be successful in order to fulfill the covenant he has confirmed to your ancestors with an oath. But I assure you of this, if you ever forget the Lord your God and follow other gods, worshiping and bowing down to them, you will certainly be destroyed. Just as the Lord has destroyed other nations in your path, you also will be destroyed if you refuse to obey the Lord your God. That's a pretty major shift in tone from the last section, isn't it? He goes from this land is going to be amazing to be careful. Be careful. Now, there's a lot here that is pretty specifically toward ancient Israel living under the covenant of Moses. We do not live under the law of Moses. We live under the law of Christ. So not all of this applies directly to us, but here's what I do think applies to us today. Abundance can be more dangerous than scarcity. Abundance can be more dangerous than scarcity. We've been saying for 3 weeks now that the wilderness is this dry, dangerous place. No food, no water, dangerous animals, scarcity. And yet Moses is warning them that the place they're about to enter, This land of abundance, while appearing and feeling much better, might actually be more dangerous. Not dangerous for physical reasons, right? No poisonous snakes and scorpions in the promised land, or at least not very many. Dangerous because they might be tempted to forget God once they enter into that abundance. Dangerous for spiritual reasons, which, if you know how the story continues, that's exactly what happens. And it doesn't even take very long, right? As the story unfolds through Joshua and through Judges and 1st and 2nd Kings, like this is exactly what happens. They begin to follow other gods and they stop obeying the rules and regulations of the Lord. They forget about him almost like within a generation upon entering into the promised land. So this is a danger that each of us faces. Because at the end of the day, we all prefer abundance, right? We would all prefer a life of fewer hardships, a life of comfort, a life of ease. We would all rather have everything that we need and most of what we want, a life without striving or strain. But let me ask you, is that really what's best for us? Because a life of no hardship, a life of just constant and continual abundance seems to be dangerous to us. Because in abundance, we all have this tendency, due to our own sin, our sin nature, to forget about God. To claim that the reason we're experiencing abundance is because of our own effort, our own cleverness, our own hard work. Not because God has been good to us and blessed us. Because make no mistake, everything you have is ultimately given to you by God. You might be a hard worker, you might be smart, you might have made some good choices along the way, but God is the one who gave you the ability to work hard, and he gave you your intelligence, and he helped you make those good decisions. Everything you have is a gift from God. He is the ultimate source of all abundance, and when life is good, we often forget that. I was reminded this week of when my son, Rhett, was born. It was a pretty tough labor. Not for me. I just kind of stood there. Chelsea did all the hard work. But because of some complications, Rhett had to spend 5 days in and out of the NICU at the hospital. Turns out it wasn't super serious, but for a couple days we didn't really know what was going on, and so it was still really scary. And so I remember taking a couple trips out in my car to pick up some things while we were staying at the hospital. And I remember climbing into the car on more than one occasion, not even starting it, just kind of gripping the steering wheel and just praying and pleading with God to heal my son and to keep him safe and to be with us and to protect us because we didn't know what was going on. And I prayed a lot in those 5 days. Contrast that with my daughter's birth. It was a much easier labor experience, or so I was told, because again, I was just there. But it was June of 2020, so there's this little thing called COVID happening. You may or may not remember that. And so the next day after we had her, they told us to go home because they're like, this is a hospital full of sick people with potentially COVID. You should just leave. And so we did. It was super fast. We were just back at home. And so now here's the thing. I much prefer that experience, especially for my wife and for my daughter, than the one that we had with my son. But you know what I didn't do that second time? I didn't pray over her in the same way. I didn't connect with God in the same way. That same raw and intense prayers that I had when my son was born, I didn't do that when my daughter was born. You know what I did do? I told everybody what we did differently. I told everyone that would listen how we chose this hospital instead of that hospital. I told everyone who would listen how we chose a midwife instead of a doctor this time. I have nothing against doctors, but I told everybody what we did, all the things that we did differently in this pregnancy versus the last one. I told everyone that would listen what we did, but if I'm honest, I don't even know if I thanked God for how much better that experience was. See, we all have this tendency. In wilderness seasons, in moments of scarcity, when life gets hard, to cry out to God. In fact, if you've made the decision to follow Jesus, chances are it happened in a moment of wilderness. Chances are it happened in a moment or in a season where life was hard and you recognized your own need for a Savior, that you could not do this yourself. You needed somebody else to do it for you, and you reached out to Jesus and He saved you. And so we reach out to God, we cry out to God in seasons of scarcity to ask for His help, His provision, His presence. But in abundance, when life is good, we far too often forget about Him. We look around at how good life is, and we go, I did this. I'm the one who made this happen. And that, I believe, is one of the reasons that God leads us into the wilderness. Why God led Israel into the wilderness. Because in the wilderness, God prepares us for abundance. God, being the loving Father that He is, wants to give us abundance. He wants us to prosper. He wants us to experience the goodness of the world that He's made. He wants us to experience the riches of His love and His grace. But He also knows that in abundance, we tend to disconnect from Him. He knows that when life is good, we have a tendency to get proud and to get forgetful. So He lovingly leads us into the wilderness. Because there's something about scarcity, there's something about when life gets hard, when we don't have enough, when we're stretched thin, that causes us to snap out of our forgetfulness and cry out to God. But that's not all, because God doesn't just seek to reconnect with us in the wilderness, although that's critical. He also wants to equip us to re-enter abundance, to re-enter the promised land. He wants to give us the tools that we need to be able to better handle abundance without forgetting about Him. He wants to shape our character to be the kind of people who don't let good things turn us into bad people. I believe this is why He lets us lose our job, so that when the new job comes, we work that new job with a deeper sense of gratitude. That we know it's not just us that got it, it's God who gave it to us. This is why I believe He lets us experience financial hardship, so that we can become better stewards of the little that we have, which in turn prepares us for handling more in a godly way. Because if you can be generous while living on practically nothing, you'll be much more likely to be generous when you have plenty. This is why I believe God lets us sit in obscurity, feeling ignored by the rest of the world, so that when the spotlight does shine on us, we can handle it with humility. See, in scarcity, in wilderness, God is preparing us to step into the next chapter. He is preparing us to step into abundance, but to do so in a way that does not endanger our souls. To do so without becoming proud, to do so without forgetting about Him. Because it is better, ultimately, it's better to be in the wilderness with God than in the promised land without Him, having forgotten Him. So as I wrap up, I've got 3 questions for us. These are designed to help keep the sermon going beyond Sunday morning. You can talk about them in the car ride home. If you're a journaler, you can journal these later in the week. Here's the first one. When have you experienced a season of scarcity? When have you experienced a season of abundance? I think it's helpful to ground these 2 concepts of scarcity and abundance in your own story, in your own history. As you think back, as you look back on your life, when have you experienced scarcity? Because it's something we've all experienced, right? When have you experienced abundance? And I think it'd be helpful as you think about that to think about, okay, what did God do in that season of scarcity? What did God do in that season of abundance? Because I believe that seasons of scarcity disproportionately shape our character, shape our thought patterns, shape us in ways that abundance simply does not. So it's worth thinking back on those seasons of scarcity and abundance that you have experienced. Second question, if you are in a season of scarcity, if that's where you're at right now, how might God be preparing you for what's next? How might God be shaping you shaping your character? How might he be preparing you? How might he be trying to give you new habits, reshape your mind? How might he be, might he be teaching you in this season? Where might he be gently rebuking you because you'd gotten on the wrong path? How is God speaking to you and trying to shape you in this season of scarcity? And then finally, if you are in a season of abundance, how can you protect yourself from the dangers of pride and forgetfulness? Because if you're in a season right now where you're like, hey, this wilderness series has been good, but like that's not where I'm at right now, that's fine. But if you're in a season of abundance where life is pretty good, like how do you protect yourself from complacency? How do you protect yourself from forgetfulness, forgetting all about God, disconnecting from him? How do you protect yourself from pride where you say, I did this? This good season that I'm in is because I made it happen. How do you protect yourself in a season of abundance? So for the past few weeks, we've been talking about the wilderness, about temptation and dependence and preparation. If you miss those, they're all on our website, hubcity.church/watch. Click on the graphic. You'll be able to find all of them. But here's what I want to leave you with. If you are in a wilderness season right now, or if you're going through, or if you're going to experience a wilderness season in the future, which is just like all of us, right? Remember this, God lovingly leads us into the wilderness, or allows us to enter into a wilderness of our own making, and he does this for our good. This is the reminder that Moses gave the Israelites, that God led them into the wilderness for their good. Because there's something in the wilderness that God wants to teach you. He wants to show you. There's a way he wants to shape your character that is best done in struggle and in difficulty. And if we'll trust God in the process, I believe it will dramatically change how we view difficult seasons. We'll stop seeing them as punishment or abandonment, and we'll start seeing them as an extension of God's goodness and his grace. So wherever you find yourself right now, whether it be in the wilderness, whether it be in abundance, remind yourself that it is better to be with God in the wilderness than in the promised land without him.